Everyone. We're all still recovering from Thanksgiving and family and friends, and I'm recovering from great barbecue being sent to me by Steve. So it's been a great week. Every Sunday morning, I get to read Maria Shriver's Sunday Pages, as I share with you often. And I love what she said last week, and I really believe it. She said it about next year. And she said, we're right on the edge of a magical new world. We don't know what it is. She says, but I'm praying for it and imagining it. And I'm open to it. I'm ready for it. This is the most exciting time in our lives to be alive. It's a time of change. And we're here because we volunteered to be here right now. Those are big words, but then I think about the last 2 years. And I came up with an analogy that seems just so appropriate. It feels like we're in a giant snow globe and God turned it upside down and went, and suddenly everything changed. Everything that we thought was firm wasn't. But one of the things that I've noticed, whatever is going on, and we are not 20-year-olds, so we see things and we go, what? The latest being the new way to shop in large groups, breaking into stores. But in the midst of that, I turn to the fact that the Unity's second principle says we are inherently good. In fact, some of the Daily Word states, my belief in goodness begins with hope. I know and feel in the depths of my soul that the good I desire is always around us. So that principle is really important in our lives. We don't see it often, though. So this morning, as we came near the end of the year, I wanted to share some examples of some things that have been really amazing to me. One of them was when we first went into the pandemic, and I don't know if you remember, in Italy, there are a large number of high-rise apartments that tend to be built around the courtyard. So there are 4 high-rises around. And when the pandemic started, the balconies went out and started singing to each other. They started having fitness classes where they would all stand on the balcony and exercise together. In some locations, people with musical instruments would come out and play together, making the best of what they had. And it wasn't just the human beings. In an aquarium in Chicago, the man that was in charge of the penguins noticed they seemed depressed. So even though there were no people in the aquarium, they took the penguins on a tour of the aquarium. They let them loose, and the man that worked with them walked them all around the aquarium. And they videotaped it. And you can see it online. If you want to see something heartwarming, see a group of 8 little penguins walking around looking through displays. Those are just some of the things that happen, and they continue to happen. A couple of weeks ago, a 16-year-old girl was abducted in South Carolina. Now, I don't keep up with everything. So when people say Snapchat and TikTok, I get confused. But TikTok is apparently a communicating thing that occurs. And on TikTok, the Canadian Women's Federation has come up with and Nancy's showing it, a way to say to people, I am being abducted, which goes like this, thumb in, hand down. This, thumb in, hand down. Well, this gal had been forced into the back seat, and her abductor thought she was waving at people, but she was doing the signal. Somebody actually saw her who knew what it meant and called the police. They pulled the car over, and as the deputies went up to the car, and the deputies didn't know what that meant, she was still doing it. And they saved her because somebody was part of a community. It's community. And we in our hearts this day, as we surround ourselves with our family that's here and not here this morning, know about this. It's a few years ago when two teenagers were hanging out in front on their bicycles, and they heard that a 5-year-old just down the street had been taken. They looked at each other and, with the optimism of teenagers, said, well, we know the area. They drove around for 30 minutes and saw a car driving in and out of cul-de-sacs, and they followed it. And eventually he noticed them following it, and he dropped off the 5-year-old on a corner, and they saved her. In that roundabout thing that happens, they were later given the funds to go to college because of that, because of what they had done. Those are the kind of good things that people do for each other all the time. And the reason I bring it up is because each of you have done these things. They aren't all bigger than life. They are what they are in the moment they are. It's that moment when we go to the grocery store and we say to the person that is checking us out as they're hitting the line numbers, is this the start or the end of your shift? And they'll go look at you and smile and say, this is my Friday, even though it's a Monday, and I get 2 days off. Those are the kind of things that make a difference to people. It's the fact that when we look into eyes, what we see is ourselves. The world is not the same as it was when we were 5 years old, and yet it is. And it's easy to get caught up with that it's not a safe place. But look into the eyes of people. It's the lady in Australia who was at the beach near Sydney. And she watched as some people who had obviously just moved to the area played on the beach, and suddenly the two young boys were swept out to sea. They could not swim, and as she started to see them sink, she looked around hoping somebody would jump in. Nobody did, so she dove in, even though she was 8 months pregnant. She swam out and found them and brought them back in, and was, just before she ran into problems, was pulled to shore. And 3 weeks later, gave birth to a baby girl. It's the busload of students in Washington whose bus driver had a heart attack as he was driving the students down the road. He went unconscious, and one of the 13-year-olds ran up, jumped over him, took the steering wheel, pulled the keys out of the ignition, guided the bus to the side of the road while two other students pulled the driver down and started doing CPR on him. Now, the driver did not survive. And yet, those three young men jumped forward. What was interesting is they asked the 13-year-old who jumped forward, what was it that you were thinking? He said, well, actually, I was reading a comic book about my superhero. And he was doing wild things. And when I saw this happen, it was like, oh, I got to do something. So I jumped up. It's that part of us that just know that community and connection is where our heart is. I've been in a number of events. I was in the National Guard and I worked a forest fire in Roseville near me. There was a train in the 80s or late 70s that had bombs on it that went off. In both cases, the community came together in so many ways to help each other out. Because in times of family, we turn to each other. And we never know. There's a story about a 22-year-old who's driving her child to preschool, and she sees the semi truck behind her slide to the side of the road and burst into fire. She pulls over and runs back, and the driver is lying on the far side of the truck in the midst of diesel fuel. She runs and pulls him off to the side, and as the highway patrol says, saved his life. Now, the interesting part is, this is the second time in 3 years she has pulled somebody out of a smoking car. Right place, right time. There's a basic foundation in this that is good, no matter who we are. There's a basic foundation that when we look into each other's eyes, know the truth. And I'm just reminded of a story that's nowhere in my sermon today, of when I was in a construction company and I had a superintendent that was very, very good. One day, one of his workers, he talked to him and said, "You need to do this." And the worker just went crazy, essentially saying, "I'm going to, beat you up. You have no right doing what you're doing." And the superintendent looked into his eyes and took a breath and said, "Are you having a tough day?" And he said the guy's face went through a whole range of emotions. And eventually the guy said, "Yeah, I am having a tough day. In fact, I'm having a tough week." Within each of us is the divine. And it is seeing it in each other. I got a chance to see it in the 80s to the highest level. The Boy Scouts do good deeds with no expectation of return. I was really blessed to have a troop that I worked with. We had 7 boys, 7 young men. And so when we gathered together the first time and got to know each other, I asked them, what were their goals? They said, well, we as a group would like to all be Eagle Scouts. Now, an Eagle Scout is about 3% of the Boy Scouts. It's about 3% because it takes 21 merit badges, which is a huge number of hours for each badge. It takes a 6-month project that must be designed, budgeted, scheduled by the scout. It must be a goodwill act for a religious institution, a school, or the community. It must be turned in to the Boy Scout governing board for approval. And it must include the whole troop. They don't do it themselves. These boys took upon them in the following 5 years as I worked with them to do some of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And the community stepped up to help them in so many ways. One of the boys worked with a school for special students and put together a program to gather together bicycle parts and new bicycles to donate to the school. And over a 6-month period, came up with 22 bikes, which he then presented to the school. One of the Boy Scouts put together a building playground for the Park and Recreation District, where he got the material donated. And for about 5 or 6 Saturdays, because I remember every Saturday, we got together and we built that thing. And in the end, out of those 7 boys, 6 of them became Eagle Scouts. And what's more interesting is now 3 or 4 of them still live in these communities where we are and are leaders in the communities because of the steps they take of seeing good in other people. And it is a basic good that happens. You know, I always like to see what other people say. And when I went through this, a friend of mine sent a letter just like 2 days ago. It's Albert Einstein, and it's a letter to his daughter that talks about the good for us. The letter was written in July of 1919, in which he says, Liesel, when I proposed the theory of relativity, very few understood me. And what I will reveal in this letter will not collide with misunderstanding and prejudice in the world. It may clarify. And I ask you to guard this letter because I'm not sure anybody would understand it in these days until society is advanced enough to understand it. There's an extremely powerful force that is so far above everything, and science has not found an answer for. It governs all others. It's behind any phenomena operating in the universe and has not yet been identified by us. The universal force is love. A precursor for the Beatles. All you need is love. When scientists looked for a unified theory of the universe, they forgot the most powerful unseen force around. Love is the light, the good that enlightens those who give and receive it. It's the gravity because it makes people feel attracted to each other. We see the humanity in each other. It is power because it multiplies the best we are. And where 2 or more of us gather together, we are more than we were before. It unfolds and it reveals. For by loving we live. Love is God. The force explains everything, gives meaning to life. And it's a variable that we've ignored. Maybe because we're afraid of it. Because it's the only energy in the universe that man has not learned to drive at will with his mind. How appropriate is that for Unity students? They are saying ego can't drive love. Love is the divine. To give visibility to love, Einstein said, I made a simple substitution. Instead of E equal mc squared, we accept that the energy to heal the world can be obtained through love, multiplied by the speed of light squared, and that love is the most powerful force in the universe. If we want our species to survive and find meaning in life and save the world, love is the answer. And I love this by the man who, once he invented this equation, stepped away from the atom bomb. He said, perhaps we are not yet ready to make a bomb of love, a device powerful enough to entirely destroy the hate, selfishness, and greed that come to the planet. But each individual carries within them a small generator of love, whose energy is just waiting to be released. When we learn to give and receive this energy, dear Liesel, we will have affirmed that love conquers all, transcends everything, and is the quintessence of life. Your father, Albert Einstein. Today, I've given a lot of different examples. And yet, again, as I say now and then, I'm preaching to the choir. This is the family. You see the divine in each other. You see the change, and when things happen, you gather together and support each other. Because love and the good within us is our true north. It's our spiritual compass point. Our true dialogue on this planet is heart-filled over a back fence, during a Zoom meeting, doing a kind act of kindness. It'll take us to a place of spiritual literacy, where we learn that life isn't a spiritual experience. It'll take us to an era of consciousness, and it is not that it's not there. It's that every time we use it, we are expressing the divine being within us. In that spiritual growth, we are growing. Someone once said, we are here to give up the good to be the great. Our job is to be warriors, not worriers. Through simple acts of love and good, we make a difference. You're here today because you're already taking these steps. All of you during this past week have done an act of love. And it's not so much doing the acts because you are doing them. It's taking a breath at the end of the day when you do your attitude of gratitude and say, I made a difference today. I made a difference today. I know I thought that when I opened my package and there was brisket and ribs and chicken and salmon, all barbecued great. I made a difference today. As the Australians would say, good on you, mate, for what you do. Keep doing it. And so it is. And so we take a breath, because that was a lot of words. And in the end, we move into that place of quiet for a short moment to be in meditation. In preparation for moving within, we take a nice deep breath. We breathe in spirit. And as we breathe out, we let go. Not even quite sure what we're letting go. Each breath allowing us to move deeper within. Below the stories, below the schedule, below the details. And as we drift deeper to that heart place, where the full divine of who we are is ever present, we move into a place of calm and quiet of peace and of silence. And for a number of minutes, we allow ourselves in this deep and quiet and serene place to breathe and to focus on our breath in the sacred silence. And as we take our next breath, we let this divine fill within, fill all that we are. that spirit of light that shines so brightly. We take one more really deep breath, and as we let out, we just let all the air go. And we give thanks for it is that place just beyond the exhaling we do, in between, that is the truth of who we are, the fullness of the God Spirit. And we bring it with us wherever we go, filled with the next step. It is part of that recognition when we look into another set of eyes. Or as Rumi has said, let us meet out beyond the field. And so we take another deep breath and allow ourselves to start to come back into the full energy of who we are, knowing there are things to do and places to go. We take another deep breath and allow that energy to start to fill us up, perhaps flexing a finger or a wrist or a foot or a leg or even an ear, as we start to come back fully into the presence of who and what we are, complete, with rejuvenation of having spent time within. We give thanks for this, knowing it is as if we've had that long afternoon nap I talk about always, with our favorite blanket or cat purring right next to our head. And when the time is right, to allow ourselves to open our eyes and know we are back, and to look into the Zoom meeting and see the faces of the gods and goddesses across from us, the ones who make a difference, for they are us. And we say, thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And so it is. Back to you, Rende.